everyone for joining today's webinar. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Bill.
Great, thanks, Michelle, and good morning to everyone. Welcome to HBK's monthly risk advisory webinar series. My name is Bill Heaven. I'm a senior director here at HBK in our risk advisory practice. And again, thanks for joining. This morning, I think we have an interesting topic for everyone. It's going to be how to protect yourself with top cybersecurity habits. So I came up with this webinar a couple months back when basically within the same week period, actually it was probably within about 3 days, I had 2 people come to me and say, oh my gosh, I just got hacked. You know, what do I do? And so one of them just happened to be my wife, and I was luckily home working in the yard, and she came out in the yard yelling at me saying, you got to come in right now. I got hacked. And I'm like thinking to myself, what does that even mean? And I walk in the house, and she was going to a internet website, and something like it was a PDF converter or something. Nothing, you know, those are notorious for being sites that are visited by hackers, and they put a lot of malware on. But the way what I came into is the PC is sitting there, and it's like got this terribly annoying siren type, you know, woo 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 going on, and it's like beeping and going oink oink oink, saying that like you've been breached. Please contact the Microsoft Help Desk immediately and click this link. And I sit down at the computer, and it's telling me not to turn off my computer. So obviously the first thing I did was turn off the computer and reboot it. And I just went through the process to get her computer back online. And then like 2 days later, somebody contacted me at work that had the same exact scenario. So I said, well, maybe this is worthwhile of a webinar and sit down and go through some of the different things that can happen and why they happen and what you can do if they do happen. So that's what created this webinar. So like I said, I think it's a pretty interesting topic. I'll give you some pointers and try to keep you out of trouble. So let's pop through. So here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about basically these 3 topics and then wrap up. So as typical, today our presentation is going to be eligible for 1 hour CPE or continuing professional education credits. In order to get the credit, you're going to have to stay online for the entire webinar and then answer 4 questions periodically throughout today's webinar. And then the last question is not really content sensitive or anything. It's just going to ask you straight out, do you want CPE, yes or no? And then if you answer yes, then we'll, assuming you answered the previous 3 questions, we'll generate a CPE certificate out to you. We're going to try to leave 5-10 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. And then we are going to send out, you can download a PDF copy of today's slides, and we're also going to send out a copy of the slides after probably 2 to 3 days before the end of the week, as well as a link to the recording of the webinar if you want to pass it on to any colleagues. But so again, here's my bio. I've been at HBK for a little bit over 5 years now, and I have a dual role in the IT department. So I do client-facing work, working with some clients, and then I do a lot of internal IT security work for HBK. Let me catch up with my notes here. So the first thing I wanna point out is, so everybody, just try to give you some more background about, you know, how is your personal PII stands for personally identifiable information. It's usually the most sensitive information out there. And so basically these are there's other ways that your PII is obtained, but these are 6 of the main ways and how hackers are out there to steal your data, your information. First being, this is a big area, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that comes about from the Verizon data breach investigations report. I did a webinar in June last month about the annual Verizon report. So credential stealing was one of their top 3 topics. So I'll touch base with that a little bit. But really what credential stuffing is, it's your account credentials, which means your user login ID and associated password. So they can obtain on the dark web these account credentials, and it's basically a number of user IDs and their associated password, and they just buy this, and it comes in a list, and they'll write a script, and they'll just bounce that against all kinds of websites and it's just a numbers game. And I'll go into some details later on as far as like current black market prices for buying some of this information off the dark web. And it's actually pretty reasonably priced, I guess you would say that. It's not very expensive to buy some of these things. So they're just buying combinations of user IDs and passwords, and then they're just running that against various websites trying to get in and see what they can find. Social numerous times. I'm gonna go into social engineering. It can be like pretexting or phishing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. Malware, that's a devised word that comes up from the combination of 2 words. Basically, you think of it as your computer viruses, but malware is a play on the words malicious software. They take the part of each of those 2 words and combine it into malware. So that's a big source of how your PII is stolen. Public Wi-Fi. It's so easy to set up a Wi-Fi forms of malware out there. You can be keyloggers where it can actually go out, and as you're trying to log into the Wi-Fi network, it can be stealing your password and your user ID. It can, if you're using public Wi-Fi to get into your corporate network, it can do that. Password spraying. This is it's a little bit different than the credential stuffing, because password spraying is because people have a bad habit. They're kind of lazy on the area of using the same exact password for every online account or every user account they have. Password spraying is similar to credential stuffing or stealing, but it's going to use that same list of user IDs and or email addresses, and they're going to use the same exact password on every one of those. And again, it's just a numbers game to see if they can get lucky and hit it. And then lastly, as a fact of data breaches, you see pretty frequently on the news that somebody got breached, and then you get your information stolen because you're part of a company's database that gets breached. Could be something like, could be a big retailer like a Home Depot or Lowe's, or it could be credit, a medical insurance like Medical Mutual or Anthem. They're always targeted. So if you're a member of one of those databases, then that could get your data out into the open. One of the things I didn't put on a slide, but if you want to take a look at, this is a reputable site. It's basically, it's referred to as Have I Been Pwned? And I'll speak slowly so you can get the URL, but it's the word have and then I, and then Ben, BEEN, and then it's pwned.com. And if you go to that web domain, and it's going to basically ask you to enter your email address, and then that site is going to go out and check breached databases, and it's going to come back and show you where you potentially have compromised data, and it'll tell you, that your email's been compromised, your phone number's been compromised, and then it gives you some recommendations. But it's a reputable site. I've always been I'm leery about sites like that, and I don't want to give anybody my personal information, but that is, I've checked that out, and that's a pretty reputable site. I checked both my primary personal email, and I was involved in breaches, and it goes through and it talks, but even my HBK email turns up on some of those dark web type sites where they've been breached. So that's a way where your information gets out there. Probably one of my biggest points of advice is just to know that this stuff is going to happen no matter how careful you are. So you've got to be kind of skeptical. For example, just this week, my wife, she bought a product, and she got an email this week that said, from that company, that said, "Hey, we noticed that there's a defect in your product, so we want to give you a brand new. So click this link here and fill out this form, and we'll send you a new one." And she got that, and she goes, "Do you think this is real?" And I said, "Could be, but let's check it out." So if you've heard my webinars before, when I talk about stuff like do a out of band communication. So I told her I said, just reach out to that company and ask them if they sent an email similar to that. So we went on, she just, totally outside of her email, and went to the domain of that company and put in a filter like 24. Yes, that is a legitimate email, so you can fill that out. So, but they try to make you think you're getting something for free, or that you have to do something, like when I described that quote unquote hacking, where they want to scare you into some false sense of urgency to act. So you don't, just my biggest takeaway is be skeptical, because this stuff happens no matter how secure you are, but I think you can keep yourself out of more troublesome situations. Let's talk a little bit about as I said, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. And again, I just talked about credential stuffing, but these are three of the top ways that information was compromised based on data breaches: phishing, exploitation of known vulnerabilities, keeping in mind that the weakest link in the whole cybersecurity chain is people. It's in our nature to be nice to people, so you want to try to help people. So it's like when the quote unquote help desk calls you up and says, we need your help to do X, Y, or Z. It's in our human nature to try to help people. So again, be skeptical, be as skeptics. They're going to try to play on our emotions to get us to do what they want us to do. Why do they do it? So the two reason is, like, you always hear the thing, follow the money. Most hackers are doing stuff, and this year's Verizon confirmed that in their reported incidents and breaches, 95% of the hackers were motivated by financial gain. So again, espionage used to be people used to think that was a big reason, and it was, and it still is, but it's very, very small. I think it's less than 2% in this past year's. But so financial gain is by far the biggest reason why people try to steal information from us. And then, for those of you that want CPE, we're going to move on to our first CPE question. And, here it is. I'll give you some time to answer that question. All right. Hopefully that was enough time for that question. Then moving on to another takeaway from the this year's Verizon report is pretexting. Now, so pretexting is a version of what's classified as social engineering. So this year, so social engineering. So think about it this way. Pretexting is kind of the name, or the word comes about from, it's basically a script. So it's where people script a situation where they're going to call you up on the phone and try to convince you that they're the help desk. They need you to give them your username and password. Or it could be what you're going to say to a receptionist because you're going to come in pretending you're an exterminator and you want to get access to the building, or you're the cable guy. And so it's just a script. So they refer to it as pretexting. Now, one of the reasons why pretexting is increased so much is, if you've heard of the type of attack called a business, all business email compromises are basically where you get in and you pretend to be either a customer or a supplier or a vendor, and you're emailing with someone else, and it's kind of along the lines of a script. So your business email compromise is saying, hey, customer, instead of sending your payment to me where you normally send it, we're having some banking issues, and so send it to this bank instead. And you may not know it, but it's probably a bank, an international bank in the Bahamas or something, and they're basically stealing your money. Now, I've had multiple over the past, I'd say probably 6 months, 12 months. I've had probably 4 or 5 calls where people have said, hey, I think I just got scammed out of money because my bookkeeper responded to this email where they're asking for a deposit to be able to order product, or I sent tens of thousands of dollars to who I thought was one of my vendors, who, when I talked to them separately, they said they didn't request the payment. So again, you want to be skeptical. Anything that seems too good to be true, or puts you in a sense where you're acting what I would refer to as urgently, where you have to do something quickly, take a step back and look at it, because it could very well be fake. And like I said, I've seen a lot of real life examples of this recently. I think this is my last slide on the Verizon. But again, ransomware is a big thing. It increased hugely from 21 to 22. Then it kind of leveled off in 23, but still it's 24% of all cyber attacks. Stated another way, virtually 1 in every 4 breaches deals with ransomware. They're looking for money. They're looking for data. Internal actors, errors are down again from last year's Verizon, but it's still a big reason. That could be an intentional or unintentional error, where you could actually have an intentional error where people misconfigure things. They didn't get the raise that they thought they should get, so they want to make their company suffer. So they intentionally configure something incorrectly, and that allows hackers to get in and get your information. So these are some key takeaways. Let's talk about our next agenda item, being what's the market for this. So first thing to think about when we're talking about the market for personally identifiable information is, where does this actually happen at? And so the internet, I'm going to go into a slide. The internet is actually broken down into components. And then here's just a little picture, and kind of, it's an iceberg floating in the ocean, and it basically says that the top part of the internet, called just basically the surface web, is actually that's the sites that what people typically think of as the internet, where it's like your Google searches, your Yahoo Finance, Wikipedia, various news searches. I think it equates to the last studies that I saw, which were from 2022. There are actually 5.5 billion web pages out on the surface web. And believe it or not, that only equates to 4% of the total, what is viewed as the total internet. And then the second component is the deep web. Now, this is typically not searchable by the general public. And it's a lot of our personal company websites where you might have like academic records or healthcare records or legal documents, things that companies don't make available for public use. And that equates to 90% of the internet. And then where we have our PII, and I'll talk about on the next slide some of the examples of data that's available for sale out on the internet, on the dark web. But that equates to like 6%. So you add those up and you come up with the total 100%. But the dark web is very difficult to get to. I would strongly advise against going to the dark web, because you need to have special types of browsers. You have to have a Tor, TOR, which is and it's an abbreviation for the onion router. But you're most likely, if you go out there, probably your cable provider or your corporate internet's going to prevent you from going there. But you don't want to go there anyway, because you're most likely going to pick up malware or viruses, and it's going to be a headache. So don't go there. But that's where all this stuff typically is available for sale. And I just pulled some examples for 2023. This was from a site called Privacy Affairs, and it was the dark web index, and they go through a lot of details. So I just tried to summarize things a bit. And getting credit card data, it depends on how much of the credit line is available, what country it's from, if it comes with the CVV number or not. But they generally range from $10 to $110. A social media account, you can actually pay for like a Facebook account or an Uber account. They typically LinkedIn account ran from like $1 to $60. And then there's two different classifications of forged documents, being if it was a scanned document or a physical document. You can see the price ranges there. This is the one I was kind of alluding to prior, the email database dump. You could actually get, for $120, you could buy 10 million US-based email addresses. So as I was saying earlier, when we're talking about credential stuffing or password spraying. If you have the bad habit of making every single password for every online account you have being like password 1234, then if I'm a bad guy and I'm gonna go out there and buy 10 million email addresses, and most websites require your login ID to be an email address. So how many of those 10 million email addresses do you think I might get lucky and hit with a password of password 123 or password 1234? So that's why it's very important to change our passwords on all our different online accounts, because that's the kind of numbers game that the hackers are playing. Again, online bank account login, and this varied. You could get, it was X number of dollars for like a Huntington account or a Chase account or a JP Morgan account or a Wells Fargo account. And those varied from like $25 to $500. The last two categories there on the list are more buying hacking tools. So I could actually go out and buy malware and spend anywhere from $35 to $4,500. I could buy software that would allow me to do a denial of service attack. I actually spoke for the manufacturing group at HBK last week, and we were talking about manufacturing and that the computers for the manufacturing, the PLC chips and everything are sometimes hooked up to the internet, and you can make your competitor have a very bad day by selling or buying some malware or getting some bad guy to put malware into their network so they can't manufacture product. So you can actually buy a denial of service attack for under $750. So that's thought that was pretty interesting, so I wanted to include that. So those are some of the ways that your data gets stolen and what it's worth when it does get stolen. So then I want to talk, the main part of the webinar is about how to mitigate your risk. So we'll go on to, first off, I want to talk about passwords. Composition, length, these are all just characteristics and how people try to crack them. And I have a slide coming up where we're going to have a polling question soon, but talks about some of the time limits it takes to crack a password. And brute force is that's just another tool. You could buy something off the dark web to go and it runs dictionaries, or it switches each of the characters and runs through about the numbers, different things, and it'll crack a password. The bottom line is, if you give a hacker enough time, they're going to be able to crack your password. But I have a table that shows you just how long based on the composition. So it's pretty interesting. But again, use a unique password for every account. Consider using a password manager. Again, a password manager only requires you to vault. You can store all these passwords to various websites. You can have the password manager create the password for you. You don't have to remember it. You just have to remember the password to get into your vault. So a lot of people will say that's not a good way, because last year we had one of the main password managers, LastPass, was the victim of a hack. All these password managers are always going to be highly sought after, just like insurance carriers or hospitals are sought after because they have a lot of very sensitive healthcare information. So just because your password manager was hacked doesn't mean that you need to switch to a different one, because there's very ripe information there. So hackers are always going to try to go after them to get it. But in the case of LastPass, I actually use LastPass personally, and when they were a victim of the hack at the end of last year, I just followed the rules and the suggestions that the LastPass came up with and changed my master password and made it even longer than it used to be, and change some of the individual accounts, like to some of my more sensitive accounts, even though they said that that wasn't required. But definitely I would consider using a password manager. And again, I still use LastPass even though they were the victim of a breach. So I feel it's relatively safe. I see advertisements on TV and streaming programs sometimes where some of the browsers now are trying to get you to save your passwords within the browser. I would highly recommend against doing that. If you're gonna save a password in a browser, you're better off saving it in a password manager. So I would turn off saving the password feature on various internet browsers. It's just giving people that already know way too much about you, even more information about you. So I would not do that. Here's our second polling question. So I'll give you 30 seconds or so to answer this question. All right, hopefully that wasn't too difficult. So here I went out and I got, this is from a website called the Cyber News. And this was the 10 most common passwords in 2023. So put the list up there. So if you can take a look at that. Hopefully no one on this webinar today has a password that's on that list. And if you do, I would suggest changing it. Also, again, if you've attended any of my webinars, it's called a password, but don't limit yourself to just a single word. You can string things together. I use a passphrase, and I'll have a couple examples later on in the webinar about how you can come up with passphrases to use as your password. Here's a list of the time it takes to crack a password. I thought this was very interesting. Whereas it's a table and you've got the number of characters from 4 to 18, and then whether you're just using numbers, which is going to be basically 10. So you've got 0 to 9, lowercase letters, upper and lowercase letters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase letters, and then numbers, uppercase, lowercase, symbols. And if you see that in this purple, when you're using these tools, you can basically crack that password instantly, to where you get down into this lower right-hand corner. That QD stands for quadrillion, which is, I have a slide coming up, the next slide, that shows how many zeros. So it's going to take, like, for an 18-character password, it's 7 quadrillion years. So that's even bigger than our national debt. So that's pretty big. But it's just a little bit of visual on how long it would take somebody to crack one of these passwords. Even if you have numbers only and you use 18 numbers, it's going to take somebody 9 months to crack that. So most of our corporate network logins are going to ask for somewhere 8 to 10 characters with numbers, uppercase, lowercase, and symbols. So you can see that's going to take from, if it's 8 characters, it could take a day, a business day, versus 10 being 5 years, 12, 34,000 years. So that gives you some pretty good comfort there. But I thought that was an interesting slide to include. Here's what a quadrillion is. So there's basically, I think there's 15 zeros. So that's like I said, a big number. Trillion, that's with the 12 zeros, that's where our U.S. national debt is. So that's again, a pretty big number. Again, passwords, I recommend using a passphrase. If you look at this, I just came up with a, I mean, this is that's basically a 38 character password. That's pretty over the top. You don't need to have something that big, but you can I'll just give you the idea. So I said like the HBK Risk Advisory Services webinar is on the 4th Wednesday with an exclamation point, and I replace one of the lowercase o's with a 0. So that's got numbers, it's got symbols, it's got uppercase, it's got lowercase, and it's ends up being 38 characters. And that table that I just showed a couple of slides ago doesn't even show. I mean, it's got to be probably in the area of 15 quadrillion years to crack that password. Now, the only thing is when you configure a password, you tell it how big it can be, and I doubt that a lot of systems are configured to allow a 38 character password, but that's an example of what you could do. Another mechanism that I've heard people is they say, sit in your office or the location where you often use your computer and just look around and pull off some objects and then string them together. So it could be something like window, door, picture. And then if you strung your words together with a hyphen, that's a symbol. And then you can replace the letter I with the number 1. Then you have upper lowercase numbers and special characters. And you got a 19 character password, which gets you in that 7 quadrillion years to break that password. So that's just, instead of just using a password or, QWERTY 1 2 3 4 or password 1 2 3, start moving. It's easy to remember the passphrase because you can remember your passphrase even if you have to change it every 90 days or so. It's pretty easy to come up with a passphrase. Then we have our typical phishing, smishing, vishing, and what they all are. Again, the phishing, email, smishing. Again, SMS is how they came up with the smishing abbreviation. SMS stands for like short message system. And then you have the newer one, vishing, where they're trying to get you by tricking you on the phone or voicemail. Here's ways that they try to spoof. And if you look at this closely, they're getting into some more tricky things, but on this slide, you can tell you have to look very closely to tell that it's a number 1 versus a lowercase l, or lowercase m versus a lowercase r and an n just put together. That kind of looks like an M. So those are just some of the ways they can trick you. Those are the old ways they can trick you. Now they're starting to use different alphabets. There's an article out there, you can Google it and find it on, I think it was on USA Today. We're talking about this, the Cyrillic alphabet, which the Cyrillic alphabet is Russian, and it's in opposition to the Latin element. So I couldn't find a good example of the Cyrillic letter A, but if you look at the A's on this slide, those are Latin alphabet A's, whereas the Cyrillic A looks kind of like a lowercase 0 with the straight side being more like a letter L joined together, if you can imagine that, A. So what they do is they build a domain or a URL that has like a Cyrillic letter A in it instead of the Latin letter A, and it's even harder than telling the difference between the lowercase l and the number 1 and the RN versus the letter M. So you have to be careful and cautious when they're getting trickier and trickier. All right, here's our third content sensitive CPE question. So I'll give you 15, 20 seconds to do this one. All right, and here's actually, this is, I just put a copy of something that what a smish could come into. This is a fraudulent text message where they're going to basically make that URL, the red cross, is going to go someplace where they want you to go instead of where you think you're going, and they're gonna ask you for your credentials or something, and it ends up just being not a good situation for you. Antivirus, anti-malware, like I talked about with that situation when I ran into where, I had a couple people that quote unquote got hacked. So you're going to want to make sure you have a decent antivirus. Here's 4 top ones for 2023. I'm not recommending any one of them. I've used all 4 of them in the past. They're all good. I also often, I'm a Windows guy at home, so I use a lot of Microsoft Defender. That started out as it was free as an anti-spyware back in the days when we distinguished between antivirus and anti-spyware. And that was back in the days of Windows 7, which is obsolete now. And then they turned it into a full antivirus. It updates itself pretty good. I've had some colleagues that are probably more technical than I am that swear by it. So I use it frequently. When my wife came up with that situation, we used Windows Defender to make sure that our computer was free. The other person that ran into the very similar situation, he ended up using Malwarebytes because he was on an Apple device, and Malwarebytes was recommended by the Apple store, so he used that. And because you want to just, when you get infected like that, you want to get off the site and get rid of it, but you want to make sure that you scan your machine so you know that you're free of any malware, because there could be a rootkit and it could automatically reinstall every time you reboot. So you want to run one of those programs to make sure you're clean. Here's a common one. So be very careful because a lot of companies will say, hey, if you're going to be out of the office, turn on your out of office attendance so we know what's going on. But be very cognizant of what you're putting in your message. Here's an example of a bad. I typically will turn on out of office for internal. we use Outlook, so Outlook allows you to distinguish between an internal and an external out of office. I typically do not turn on an out of office for external. I just let the people inside my office know what's going on, and I'm not nearly as verbose as this, trying to tell people what we're doing. Getting a lot of beeps here. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. But yeah, so be cognizant. This is an example of what you don't want to do. It's giving your exact location, that you're in Burlington, Vermont, when you're there, the dates that you're traveling being June 1st to 7th. You're giving away your contact information, who you work for, what your position is, who your boss is, what your cell phone number is, what your corporate email is, what your corporate phone number is. I mean, this is way too much information. You don't know who's going to read this. So again, I would suggest, personally, I just do it for internal. And hold on one second. And then your unsubscribe link, you hear about these unsubscribes that I never respond to these either, because you get these what are obviously spam or phishing emails, and they say like, well, if you don't want to keep getting these emails, hit the unsubscribe link. Well, what you're doing when you do that is you tell whoever's doing that list that they just hit a valid, real life email address. So I just basically delete them. Social media, you have to be careful what you post, because you can give away a lot of information. I've attended seminars in the past where hackers will go out and do a demonstration of just looking at somebody's, got a pretty persistent salesperson there. So, but be careful what you post, because they're going to look at that and possibly could use that information to hack into your accounts. I mean, keep in mind, you're giving out friends' names, talking about your personal life often, hobbies, pet names, password, passphrase. Some people use, birthdays and names of pets for their passwords. So it's, you can give away a lot of information there. Online accounts. This is actually, I'm going to correct this slide. I was in hurrying to get the slides posted for today's webinar, and the online account and the next slide, the identity protection, I didn't update the online account, but really this one should be for your online accounts. Regularly monitor that account and sign yourself up for text alerts, either from email or text message, and you can that's going to save you a lot of time. Again, and there's lots of things that are going on, but doing that, you're going to see, if you have online bank accounts, I'd log in there regularly just to make sure your balances look good. So there's different things you can do there to help that, but let me move on to the next slide, because so I can give you some time for questions. Identity protection. You always can go to, there's a free annual credit report. Make sure you're going to the right site when you go there, because that's the actual domain is annualcreditreport.com. So if you Google that or Bing that or whatever search engine you're using, it's going to bring up about 5 or 6 paid, credit report sites that aren't the free site. So make sure you're watching what you're clicking. But the free credit report gives you one credit report from each of the 3 bureaus, the 3 bureaus being Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. So what I've done in the past is you can do every 4 months, you can do a credit report from a different bureau and kind of give yourself free coverage. Additionally, I freeze my credit. That if you do freeze your credit, you have to be aware that it's not going to allow you to get your free annual credit report. So that's a side effect of freezing your credit, but I'm a big proponent of freezing your credit. Some people don't like it because they say it gives you a false sense of security. If you do freeze your credit report, it's only going to protect you from people, doing new accounts in your name. It's not going to protect your existing accounts. It's not going to protect your bank balances. But so that's, again, why you want to monitor your accounts with the text messages. Definitely turn on multi-factor authentication. And I would also suggest that some people will say the banks are going to be the biggest users of the multi-factor, and they're going to say, is this your computer? Do you want us to add this to our list so we don't do MFA? I always decline that and let them force that MFA all the time. So, but again, make sure you do that. The freezing of your credit isn't that big of a deal. There was an FTC law that was passed back in 2018 because the bureaus used to charge you to freeze and unfreeze your credit. Some states were free. Some states, like I think Ohio at the time, it used to charge you $4 or $5 to freeze and unfreeze and that. But there was an FTC law that passed in 2018, I believe, that said that became free. So I would strongly suggest that, and set yourself up for text messages and you can keep pretty up to speed. It's not a guarantee. I mean, I just personally, somebody got one of my credit cards a couple weeks ago. I have no idea how they got it, but went to check out of one of our wholesale clubs, and they declined my charge. And then they started going like, "Are all these wire transfers yours?" So somebody ran up about $2,000 worth of wire transfers. I have no idea how it happened, but get yourself a credit card that gives you zero fraud liability, and then monitor yourself through text messages, and you're probably going to be pretty good. One of the last things you can do is make sure you shred all your personal information so you can keep people from quote unquote dumpster diving. And security questions, you don't have to use the real ones. You just have to keep track of what you use. And then also know where you've used like your real security questions, like your favorite color or your mother's maiden name. I usually make up answers for these questions, but one of the kind of was comical. One time my birthday's in August, but I just used my cyber birthday being August 1st, and I'm getting all these Facebook messages one day on August 1st, like happy birthday. And it's because I was using fake security questions so that I wasn't giving away my real information. And so I had to tell people, oh, it's not really my birthday, that's my cyber birthday. But again, you can use fictitious answers to all those questions, but you just have to keep in mind when you started doing that and what the answers are, because if you do have to get into some of your accounts, you know, they're going to ask you those questions, and if you're given the wrong ones, see, so those are some tips there. Also, you can do things. One of the tricks I use to when I'm monitoring my accounts is like when I buy gas, I always end it in the same number. You know, like it's maybe it's 9. So instead of being, you know, getting $10 worth of gas, you get $10.99 worth of gas. So you can look through quickly and say, all right, all my gas charges end in 9, so those are me. Because a lot of times if they skim your credit card number and they're trying to find out if a stolen credit card is going to work, they'll often go to a gas station because they don't have to face anybody, and they'll try a transaction for like $5 or something to see if your credit card, if your fraudulent credit card that they just bought is going to work. So that's a way you can help to monitor your stuff. You can tip at a restaurant and always end in the same 99. You know, that's a quick, easy way so when you're monitoring stuff, you can tell if transactions are yours. It gets a little confusing if you're buying retail purchases end in whatever they're ending in, but those are just a couple ways. Restaurants and gas where you can kind of control what your charge ends up being. And here's our last CPU question. So again, if you want CPU for today's webinar, go ahead and that. Let's see, that should be enough time there. Then I'm gonna wrap up, and then we'll answer some questions. So again, people often ask me, what do I do if I've been, you know, I talked about this business email compromise. You know, my company just lost, you know, X number of $1,000 because we fell for the fish, the pretext business email compromise. You can contact the Internet Crime Complaint Center, and that's short. It's often referred to as IC3 because of the 3 C's being Crime Complaint Center, and their web address is ic3.gov. It's a die, and it's good to, you know, present things because, you know, the FBI is going to want to have a very big crime to, you know, spend the time to it. But if you get like somebody that's doing business email compromises in an area, they can roll those up, and like maybe they got 10 companies that each got hit for $10,000, so that's a $50,000 crime. That might meet their threshold as opposed to somebody doing it themselves. So you can go to ic3.gov, and again, they're going to collate things up and see some patterns and maybe be able to help you out there. And definitely, as far as if you get involved in one of those business email compromises where you're emailing money, as soon as you notice that that's gone, especially if it's going international, there's like a time 24 hours. So contact the sending and receiving banks immediately. And a lot of times, if you do it quickly enough, they can claw that money back. But if you do, you wait like, well, this happened last week, then you're probably going to be out of luck and not have much luck there. So that's the presentation for today. And I see we have a couple questions that have come in. So we have one question here that my personal insurance company offers fraud ID coverage. Is it worth the money? That's kind of, I haven't really evaluated that type of coverage. I don't personally do that. And again, you're going to have to figure out your own situation. Like what are they going to charge you to do that? That's the same thing as like, is LifeLock worth it or not? Freezing your credit is going to prevent you from having new accounts open in your name. It doesn't prevent you. LifeLock, for example, is now saying they monitor your bank accounts, and that's so it's going to help you there. So again, it could be worth the coverage because I know it is a major pain in the butt when this stuff happens. I lost probably 2 hours on the phone with the credit card that I described in my personal life that got compromised, going through, answering their questions and getting a new card. So it depends on what that fraud ID coverage is going to cover and if it ends up being worth it. So again, I'd look at it, find out exactly what they're going to charge you and what they're going to cover to see if it's worth it. Could be, but often, they may be overcharging you there. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying that those LifeLocks and stuff isn't worth the money, but there's a lot of bad stuff going on out there, and you just have to figure out what it's going to benefit you and if it's worth it. Today's webinar worthwhile. I think we're getting pretty close to our time limit here. I want to point out that our webinar in August is going to be on Wednesday, August 23rd, again from 10 to 11, and we're going to be talking about the topic of data destruction from a corporate level. We have one of our contacts, our friends, Kevin and Jen from Northern Shore Services, who've presented. It's been a couple years since they presented, but they always get a very good following. So they're gonna present in August about some of the most recent changes in the data destruction. So look for that invite coming out in early August, and hope you can join us then. And if anybody has any questions, I'll bot back, but you can reach out to me by email. Give me a call if you have a question that I didn't get a chance to answer or that you think of after we hang up today. But again, thanks for joining, and have a great day, everyone.